the presentation room. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off so we can get started. I want to respect everyone's time. But first, I just want to go over a really quick agenda for what we are going to be discussing today during the presentation. And you'll see here, first I'll do a quick round of introductions. I'll also let you all know that we have a space for you all to provide introductions as well down in the chat. But really kind of the main event here, after we just do a brief overview of Taproot and who we are, is all about the volunteer management lifecycle. So my goal for this presentation is to review the volunteer management lifecycle to make sure that you as nonprofits are prepared to develop new volunteer programs or provide better support along the way for already existing volunteer programs that you have running. And along the way, I'll try and provide some examples of how pro bono support, what we call skilled volunteerism, can be useful to help you as an organizational leader at every stage of the volunteer management lifecycle. I'll also give you a whole list of volunteer management solutions that you can use to take a look at. We'll also send out a copy of this deck in the recording, so you'll have this in your belt as well if you want to refer back to it. And then we'll also discuss how you can use your own, our own rather, online marketplace, Taproot Plus, to get support for developing your own volunteer programs. So this presentation is all about nonprofits who are either getting started and going to be using a lot of volunteer support to execute their missions, or maybe you're already a nonprofit using volunteer support to execute a lot of your missions and you just want some extra pointers or some things to think about. My goal is for you all to walk away from this presentation having learned something, or at least having reminded you, hey, I need to check in on this, or we need to add this to our volunteer program, or something like that. And at the very end, we will have a Q&A. So if your question was not answered during the duration of the presentation, feel free to drop it down into the chat. I'm going to leave some time at the end to answer your questions. Like I said, we're going to send you some follow-up material so you can stay in touch with us as well if you have any more questions after the presentation. But I want to just quickly introduce myself. As you can see here, I'm Josh. I am the nonprofit success coach here at Taproot, and I work very closely with our Taproot Plus team. So Taproot Plus, as many of you may know, is our online marketplace where we facilitate and do matchmaking between nonprofit leaders like yourselves and skilled volunteers who want to give back on a pro bono basis to help build capacity at nonprofits. So if you don't know anything about Taproot Plus, I am going to show you a little bit about it at the end of the presentation. So we hope you go and check that out as well if you want to start sourcing some pro bono consulting assistants, or what we call skilled volunteers. But I'm also going to have my colleague, Kristen, who's here from our marketing department, come in and introduce herself as well. She's going to help co-lead this presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen, the Marketing Communications Associate here at Taproot, and today I will be active in the chat. So as Josh said, if you have any questions or comments, thoughts during the presentation today, feel free to drop it in the chat. And to get us started, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well.
Yeah, as Kristen said, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear your name. And if you're comfortable sharing your location, let us know where you're at, where you're located. We love seeing the geographic reach of all the nonprofits in our network. And if you want to share some about your mission, what's your nonprofit's bread and butter? What do you all do? This can also be a great networking opportunity. If you see nonprofits in here that are similar to what you do or that you're interested in, feel free to drop your websites or your LinkedIn information. Again, this could be a great networking opportunity to discover who your peers are across the country and the world. So while you all are introducing yourselves and getting busy in the chat, I just want to briefly touch on the basics of Taproot and who we are and what we do. So this is Taproot's mission. So at Taproot, we empower mission-driven organizations by mobilizing skilled volunteers to advance resource equity. So we are a bridge builder. We are an intermediary. We get pro bono consultants to link up with nonprofits. Sometimes you'll hear us say pro bono consultant. Sometimes you'll hear us say skilled volunteer. They're kind of interchangeable. I'll actually touch on that distinction in the next slide or two here to let you know what I mean. But that is our bread and butter here at Taproot. That is what we do. We do it in several different ways. Like I said, we run an online marketplace. We also have different departments that partner with corporations to engage their own employees on pro bono service for nonprofits. So we achieve this mission in several different ways. So I do want to kind of tee things up here a little bit by talking about volunteering in the nonprofit sector, and specifically general kind of trends, at least across the United States, that we see in terms of volunteering in the nonprofit sector. So this probably won't come as a shock to many of you, especially if your own organizations rely heavily on volunteers, but around 25 to 30% of Americans report volunteering on some basis for some organization annually. Additionally, that volunteer support actually carries a grand total of almost $200 billion annually. So we oftentimes don't think of volunteering as a business necessarily, but when you put a dollar value to all those hours that volunteers are putting into nonprofit organizations and elsewhere, it actually does come with a pretty big price tag. So if we can plausibly talk about the volunteerism industry, it does come with a pretty sizable price tag as well. And as many of you may know, small and medium-sized nonprofits oftentimes rely very, very, very heavily on volunteers. I know I'm preaching to the choir there a little bit. Additionally, the stat is not up on this slide, but I did want to share that as recently as 2022, the University of Maryland's Do Good Institute conducted a survey called the State of Volunteer Engagement. And it was a national survey, and they surveyed about 1,200 nonprofit CEOs, conducted in mid-2022. And these are mostly nonprofits that rely heavily on volunteers. Nearly half of the respondents said recruiting enough volunteers is a really big problem at their organization. And this is a very, very steep increase compared to the last time they conducted this survey. So it was actually a 62% increase. They hadn't conducted the survey in a very long time. It had been over a decade. But we're seeing that recruitment and retention in particular is something that nonprofits are having a lot of trouble with. So I'm going to be focusing in on a little bit of that as well in this presentation to talk about at every point, how each of these points play into retaining and recruiting volunteers. But first, I want to touch on just the different types of volunteerism. I think everyone has an idea in their mind of what a volunteer is. And sometimes we don't think of how expansive this definition can actually be. So the first one is board service. A lot of people don't necessarily think of board service as volunteers, but technically your board members obviously are volunteers. So the definition of volunteerism covers them as well. And next we have what we call hands-on volunteerism. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as traditional volunteerism, but hands-on volunteerism, I think, is a better descriptor of what it actually is. This is what most people think of when they think of volunteers. These are the people doing direct service. They're staffing the check-in table, they're painting the buildings, they're stuffing envelopes, they're passing out flyers. The people who are kind of, like I said, doing active service. They're roving around on the museum floor, engaging in visitor service and things like that. when we say volunteerism, most people kind of think about this. And then there's skilled volunteerism. This is what Taproot's mission is all about. Skilled volunteerism, as the name would imply, is something along the lines of, maybe you're an accountant and you want to give back your discrete skill set that you use on the job to a nonprofit organization. Maybe you're a graphic designer. Maybe you're an HR professional who wants to help a nonprofit develop its first employee handbook. That's what we call skilled volunteerism. So there's a lot of different types of volunteerism. And what I like to emphasize here is none of these different types of volunteerism is a substitute for the other, and nonprofits oftentimes rely on all three. So all three of these different types of volunteerism are of tremendous value, and none can really be used as a substitute for the other. And if nonprofits are really powered by volunteerism, they're going to be relying on all three of these types of service. Now, for this presentation, we're going to kind of be focusing a little bit more on hands-on volunteerism and the skilled volunteerism aspect. We do have other information on the resources page of our site if you want to hear a little bit more about board development, for example. We can link you to those later if you're really interested in that type of volunteerism. But now we want to kind of jump into the volunteer management life cycle, like I said before. So consider this a kind of short crash course on setting up, managing, planning, and executing a volunteer program at your nonprofit organization. So really the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to start with planning. You never want to jump into anything without a plan. And I'm a big proponent of this. So first, you want to really level set and lay the ground and set up the architecture of your volunteer program. And the first way you're going to do that is something you should do almost at every exercise you're doing at a nonprofit, which is clarifying your mission and goals and aligning everything you're doing back to your mission and goals. So you want to sit down with your team and actually define the purpose of the volunteer program and make sure it is actually aligning with your organization's mission and your organization's strategic priorities. So most nonprofits either have a strategic planning map or game plan or document of some kind that they're referring back to. If you don't, I highly recommend that you get a jump on that as well. But you want to make sure whatever you're doing aligns with the overall mission of the organization and the immediate strategic priorities that your nonprofit is going after. This might seem kind of basic, like, yeah, we already know all that. But it can really help later on down the road in making sure volunteers feel very empowered and connected to your organization's mission. So it's always a healthy exercise to do that, really with anything your nonprofit is doing, aligning it back to your mission and goals. For smaller organizations, you might want to focus on a few key programs or services to start small, and prioritize volunteer roles directly supporting maybe those core activities. So whether you're doing a lot or starting out doing a very little, this is always a good exercise, I think, to go through. Next, as part of your planning process, you're going to identify the actual needs and roles that these volunteers are going to be taking on. So you want to define the tasks and responsibilities volunteers can assist with versus the ones they're not going to assist with, which can be just as important in defining. And you want to create a short list of volunteer roles and job descriptions. So it's at this point where I usually like to point out volunteers are a part of your workforce in the same way paid staff are. It's a little different, but the best volunteer programs run the best when volunteers are considered a part of the staff of the organization. So when we say prepare job descriptions, we're saying prepare a job description for them just like you would someone you were bringing on in a paid role. So their role in your organization should be very clearly defined in a job description, just like paid staff are. You want to be very intentional about what activities and duties are for volunteers and what activities and duties are just for paid staff and why. Creating job descriptions will also help you in the recruitment process and will help serve you in professionalizing your volunteer program. I'm going to use that phrase a lot, professionalize your volunteer program, because I think that's the best way to secure the best outcomes whenever you're doing any volunteer program. Next, you want to think about your volunteer core as another program really that your nonprofit is offering. So you want to develop a program plan, just like for all the other programs that you're running. So this means creating policies, guidelines, and procedures, and defining the success metrics and evaluation criteria you're using. That last bit is kind of left out sometimes, but you need to think, okay, how will we know if this volunteer program is a success? What goals do we want to hit? What numbers do we want to see? What metrics are we looking at? So you also want to start thinking, what those measurements look like. And again, this will help you professionalize your volunteer workforce. Paid staff usually have goals, and volunteers should have them too. You'll also just want to remember when you're planning your program that good volunteer coordination usually involves clarifying how you're going to supervise and communicate with your volunteers, deciding if you need liability coverage for volunteers, the actual screening and matching of volunteers to specific roles or jobs, the regular collection of information on volunteer involvement, creating written policies and job descriptions for volunteers. This also includes recognition activities for volunteers and overall annual measurement of volunteer impact. It could also include training and professional development for your volunteer workforce and training for paid staff in working with and helping run your volunteer program. So I know that was a lot. There's a lot to consider there, but I just want to show you how kind of deep this could go in the planning stages of your volunteer program. So now, like I said at the top of the presentation, as I kind of go through the volunteer management lifecycle, I want to just give you ideas of how skilled volunteers can actually help you develop your volunteer program along the way. So again, these skilled volunteers are kind of bringing their white collar skill sets to your nonprofit. And this is not an exhaustive list of the ways you could engage a skilled volunteer while you're in the planning phase of planning out your volunteer program. But I just wanted to give you some ideas about how you could potentially engage someone who is a pro bono consultant, a skilled volunteer. So here you can see you might need help with identifying roles and the necessary qualifications and or certifications. That's something an HR professional could help you with. Along with preparing formal job descriptions that outline duties, tasks, and responsibilities. Again, a great HR consultant could help you do that. But also, you could bring in someone who's an impact analyst or data analyst to help you design the success metrics and evaluation criteria to help scale your program out over time. So, not all of these things are intuitive, and it can be really, really helpful to have the outside assistance of a business professional in helping you put all this together. So like I said, this is not an exhaustive list, but in the planning stage, these are some of the most immediate things that you might want to take into consideration. And these are all examples of things that you could bring to the Taproot Plus marketplace and pitch as a project there and source a skilled volunteer for. So now the next part of the project management lifecycle is the recruitment phase. So recruiting for your volunteer program. So like everything, you want to have a strategy. First, you're going to kind of develop a recruitment strategy. You want to create personas and target demographics of the types of people that you want to be volunteering at your organization. You're going to design marketing collateral to reach out to those prospective volunteers. And try and identify some partners that you can use in your recruitment efforts. So when you begin your recruitment efforts, you really want to clarify who is going to be the best fit for the roles that you're giving to these volunteers. So for example, at a prior volunteer coordination job that I had at a very large museum, we learned very quickly that our information desk was a great fit for energetic retirees who wanted to volunteer, and that our floor positions, where we had volunteers roaming, through the museum itself, through the exhibits, was a great fit for retirees, but also for high school and college students who were completing their community service requirements or other volunteer hour quotas for their degrees or program requirements or honors programs or things like that. So we actually gamed that out and kind of thought about it and thought about what would work best. This is also a good point to clarify how you're going to be marketing your volunteer program and what kind of materials you're going to need to do that. So you're going to need to develop flyers, brochures, social media listings, rack cards, email campaigns, things like that. Those are all things to consider how you're actually going to get the word out there. And additionally, where are you going to be advertising your volunteer program? The options are many. So you could do some personal networking, special events or community presentations, what's going on in your area, especially if you're recruiting for people to do a lot of hands-on work to execute the programs at your organization. You want to think about who are the potential partners and allies that you can go to help in your recruitment efforts. Then you also want to design an application process. Again, going back to the theme of professionalizing your volunteer program, you want to have an application process just like you would for paid staff. And you want to have job applications and a screening procedure in place. So you want to design an application form or template and define those screening procedures, if you're going to be doing interviews. Some nonprofits do require background checks for their volunteer programs, depending on what those volunteers are going to be doing. So here's some things also to consider when vetting a volunteer for a role at your organization. What are the causes that they feel passionate about? You might even have them self-screen for this, for example. What are their must-haves and non-negotiables? What sparks joy, in what they like doing, at work, for example. You want to consider that as well. How do they like to be appreciated? What's the best way to celebrate their work? What adjustments can be made to address volunteers' special needs, for example? Do they at least meet your minimum kind of qualifications for the role that you're looking for? And what skills do they have to share that you might not know about? You're also going to want to see, how does a volunteer react in specific situations that they might encounter when fulfilling a volunteer role at your organization? And remember, again, some but not all roles might require a background check. So if that is a requirement you are going to use, make sure that the requirement is transparent and communicate it in simple, not demanding language, and clearly explain the relationship between that requirement of a background check and a mission. Also, just aim to make the screening process respectful and efficient. You want to be consistent in how you conduct background checks and be transparent with prospective volunteers about how that information is going to be used. So I know sometimes the background checks, that's sometimes a lot of questions we get about what should I be actually looking out for? What are the best practices for using background checks? And so that's just a few guidelines to think about. So the next part in the recruitment process is training and orientation. You want to provide onboarding to introduce the nonprofit mission and expectations for the volunteer role. And you'll want to try where possible to tailor the training and protocols to each role. So if proper training and onboarding is not provided, volunteers might just do their own thing, which may not align with your organization's mission or goals at all. Good onboarding and training will make the volunteer feel very prepared and ready to take on their tasks and represent the organization in a professional way. This in turn becomes really important for volunteer retention, which is one of the biggest issues that nonprofits face when running volunteer programs. So when volunteers feel like they're being set up for success, they are much more likely to stay at your organization if you set them up for success. And remember, There is no one-size-fits-all type of training, but most training will want to get in front of these very common types of issues that volunteers experience on the job. So one of the first issues is knowledge gaps. So when when the skilled volunteers don't necessarily have the right information to tackle all of their tasks. Skills gaps. You might have to upskill volunteers on certain things that they don't know how to do. They might not necessarily know how to do everything until you train them on how to do it. Motivations gaps. So volunteers, getting them in the right mindset and attitude. This is why it's very, very important to connect everything back to your mission. There's also circumstantial gaps, or rather, some things in the environment that's impeding the volunteer from doing their job. That's another thing to get out in front of during training and orientation. And then finally, communications gaps. So when instructions are not clear or not regularly and consistently communicated in a transparent way. So those are just some things to consider when you're developing, whether it's just a PowerPoint orientation and then, walking them around to show them how everything works, or maybe it's something they can view online. Maybe it's a little more intense. They have to come for a series of days before they're cleared to actually work at your organization. Regardless of what form your training and orientation takes, knowledge gaps, skills gap, motivation gaps, circumstantial gaps, and communications gaps are things that your training program is going to need to get out in front of and address if you're going to successfully professionalize your volunteer workforce. So at this recruitment stage, here's just another list of ideas where a skilled volunteer could step in and lend support in helping you develop your recruitment process for a volunteer program. So you could actually get some support from a marketing professional like Kristen here, who could help you develop key messages and collateral for your volunteer program. So things like information on your website, flyers, one pages, social media posting. Maybe you need graphic design support because you don't have that in-house, or you want to hire a copywriter on a pro bono basis to help you message this and get people motivated about your volunteer program. You can also get HR assistance for designing the application and screening procedures, especially if you are going to involve a background check. It can be very, very helpful to have that kind of oversight if you don't already. And you can also get the expertise of a program design expert for support in developing your orientation and training curriculum. Those people oftentimes have a very good eye of how to structure those things. So again, not an exhaustive list, but this is another way in which skilled volunteers could help you along your way. And again, these are all examples of things that you could bring to our online marketplace, Taproot Plus. Not an exhaustive list, but just something to get those creative juices flowing. The next stage in your volunteer management life cycle is going to be actually managing your volunteer program once you get it up and running. So now you're executing it, you have volunteers. Here's some things to consider. So oversight and support is going to be the first thing you want to consider. If you can have someone at your organization fulfill this role, there should be someone who is the point person for volunteer coordination. You also want to develop and invest in some kind of communications infrastructure, especially for those of you out there who are running very big volunteer programs, maybe with, dozens and dozens or even over 100 volunteers. You'll want to try and think ahead in developing this communications infrastructure. I highly recommend investing in or making it a goal to be able to invest in some kind of what we call a VMS, a volunteer management solution, especially if your organization is heavily reliant on volunteers in great numbers. I'm actually going to give you just a list of various VMSs. There are many. And many of them also do have like discount and like freemium versions for nonprofits to use as well. But a lot of these volunteer management solutions actually integrate a lot of what I've just gone over into their products directly. So They help prompt you on all of this. They can be a very, very indispensable tool, especially if your organization is very, very reliant on volunteers. When it comes to volunteer communications, my general advice is try and meet your volunteers where they're at. So this is why it's good to think through those personas and demographics we discussed earlier when you begin developing your program. How am I going to communicate to these people that work for my organization specifically? If your volunteer staff is comprised mostly of people from like Gen Z or Gen Alpha, sending them information via snail mail probably isn't going to be the best way to reach out to them, right? They're going to want an app. So that's just something to consider. Going back to, again, thinking who you're targeting to be in your volunteer program, it's going to affect the way you communicate with those people. And whenever you do develop your communication structure, there are some common mistakes I'd recommend to avoid when it comes to communication. So one of the first ones is sending irrelevant communications. So not all volunteers are necessarily working on the same things. If you can, try and segment volunteer communications if possible. Again, a VMS will kind of help you do that. Another thing to watch out for is sending too many communications. This can be overwhelming to volunteers, especially if they're new, and it can give them a lot of information to sift through, and they don't necessarily know what to prioritize. So try to create a regular communication schedule and timeline, not just kind of bombard them with, communications whenever, you think it's necessary. Try to be strategic in how you communicate. The next one kind of speaks for itself, but under communicating, not providing enough information. It's all about striking a balance. You should aim to keep lines of communication warm without overdoing it. Because sometimes nonprofits or volunteers can get easily overwhelmed, but you want them to have the necessary information going forward. The next part of managing your volunteer program is something that is unfortunately often overlooked. And I say unfortunately because this one's actually really big. If you do not have some kind of celebratory activities or recognition, you are not incentivizing people to come and be a volunteer at your organization. This really cuts to the heart of retention and being an attractive organization to give back to. This is all about communicating to the volunteers the impact that they're making on your bottom line, which is your mission, of course. And chances are, this is why the volunteer is showing up in the first place. So this is one of the keys to volunteer retention, is making sure you do enough celebration. What I recommend is where you can use hard numbers to let volunteers know about their impact. You should definitely do so. And if you can, host appreciation events, even development opportunities, but in particular, also giving feedback, to your volunteers is very, very important. Recognition doesn't necessarily have to break the bank. It can come in the form of references. It can come in the form of personal handwritten thank you cards from the CEO. Like I said, you don't necessarily have to host like a massive gala to do some of these recognition things. It could be shout outs on social media. But you want to make sure you are recognizing and celebrating your volunteers' efforts in some way. And you want to make sure to do it regularly and give, that kind of positive reinforcement. Again, backing things up with numbers where possible, which brings me kind of to the next part of the volunteer management, which is evaluation. So this is another kind of overlooked part of the volunteer management lifecycle, but it is incredibly important. So as we discussed kind of at the top of the presentation, you're going to want to try and establish goals and metrics that you're measuring over time to better understand how you can improve the volunteer program over time. Provide a way for volunteers to give feedback. This could be surveys, anonymous comment boxes, focus group sessions, and regular regularly review that feedback to make adjustments to your program along the way. Providing an outlet for volunteers to give feedback also makes them feel like a more valued part of your organization, which will keep them coming back. Again, I'm hitting the retention theme pretty hard in this presentation, but it makes them feel like they have skin in the game. And again, it's always good to have those metrics so you can refer back to them. You can see, are we hitting these metrics? Do we need to adjust them? You should aim to adapt your programs and procedures as you go based off of this feedback. And again, at this management phase, I want to give you some ideas of the ways in which you could engage a pro bono consultant, a skilled volunteer. So you could engage a skilled volunteer in operations support for developing a communication system of some kind. So maybe you are getting a VMS and you need help setting it up and kind of figuring it out, and someone to work with you in doing that. That's a good project for a pro bono consultant. But you could even engage the services of someone who is an event planner if you are going to have some kind of celebration event or recognition activity. That's another type of professional service that could be donated on a pro bono basis that you might want to take advantage of to celebrate your volunteers. But also crunching data. So data impact support for creating evaluation metrics to benchmark progress. Not only for your volunteer program, but communicating the success of their volunteering efforts to them with numbers and stats and figures. Again, it's about communicating with those volunteers where they're at. Maybe some people really love, seeing pictures of volunteers out of the community. Maybe you have some people who like seeing hard numbers and graphs and things like that. So you want to try and appeal to them, where they're at, whichever kind of metrics you're engaging or impact that you're trying to demonstrate. So again, not an exhaustive list, but at the management stage, these are some of the main ways skilled volunteers could potentially help you. And now I want to touch again on a little bit about those volunteer management solutions. So this is just kind of a short list of some of the most popular ones out there that you can research and find. So again, we'll be sending you a copy of this deck, so you don't necessarily have to jot all these down really quick or try and memorize as many as possible. Some of you might have heard about some of these already. Some of you might even already be using some of these, but these are some of the most popular. And each of them kind of does a different thing. There are some that are a bit more basic. There are some that are much more extensive and will do things like help you develop that marketing collateral, help you develop application templates, add the portal to the app to collect all your applications through your website right there. The list goes on. Some of them will even crunch the hourly value of volunteers' efforts and turn it into a dollar value amount, which can be great for, demonstrating the impact of your volunteer programs. So, like I said, some of these are very, very expansive. Some of them are a bit more basic, but you can even engage the help of, a technology expert and a program design expert to help you audit and vet which VMS could actually work best for your organization and your volunteer program. So that's another consulting engagement you could get help on through something like Taproot Plus as well. So a lot of different VMSs out there, but if you are an organization that is heavily reliant on volunteers or is planning to be or looking to expand, this is one of the first things I would start thinking about, especially if you're working with a lot of people. There are a lot of organizations now that have their volunteer support programs run through apps. Where their volunteers can stay up to date, get communications, schedule themselves. All of that can be done right through your phone. So a lot of these programs make it easy if you really know how to make them work for you. So I encourage all of you to go out and research some of these on your own time as well. But I will, as promised, some of you might be wondering, like, okay, you've talked about, these wonderful pro bono consultants and skilled volunteers. How do I get in touch with them? So that's where Taproot comes in. This is kind of where our mission comes in. So this might be old news for some of you, might be brand new news for some of you. But we run an online marketplace ourselves that you can find at taprootfoundation.org. We call it Taproot Plus, and it is an online marketplace where you, as nonprofit professionals, can pitch consulting opportunities and things that you need done by a professional from the outside. Maybe you don't have the talent or the skills to do it in-house if it's something like graphic design, or maybe you need the help of an HR professional to develop those job descriptions. Maybe you need some tech support. You can pitch your project on the Taproot Plus marketplace. We'll boost it out there. We have a big pool of skilled volunteers, of consultants who are interested in doing pro bono work for mission-driven organizations. So our baseline eligibility for Taproot Plus is for nonprofits located in the United States. You have to be a 501c3 nonprofit or have written signed attestation of fiscal sponsorship from a 501c3 organization that you can show us to be eligible to use Taproot Plus in the United States. We are also available in the United Kingdom, Canada, all EU countries, and India. Obviously, those countries, they don't have 501c3 status because that's specific to America. But we recommend, if your nonprofit has any kind of charitable registration number or nonprofit registration number with your local governing authorities, you'll see when you sign up, there's a space to plug that in. So if you do have it on tap, please plug that in. We review all of those organizations that are coming in internationally as well and kind of vet them on a individual basis. But we are available in those geographic jurisdictions as well if you want to use Taproot Plus in any country outside of the United States. So I recommend, if you're a nonprofit, you can create an account, and it's an evergreen resource. So there aren't any deadlines or anything like that you have to meet. You can post a need to our marketplace, and if a skilled volunteer is interested, they'll apply to your project, and we'll reach out to you directly and say, hey, there's someone interested in working with this project with you. Take a look at what they have to say, take a look at their skills, take a look at their LinkedIn. If you like what they have to say, you can schedule a call with them to kind of have a talk and see, vet them a little further. And, they're interested in hearing more about what the project entails and your mission as well. Ideally, you'll be able to find a perfect candidate that you can match with to help you on this project. So you can vet multiple candidates, but you can also match with that perfect person who you think can help lend support. And I do want to show off as part of our website. If you go to taprootfoundation.org, we have something called the pro bono menu. This just gives you an idea of really what's possible in each of these different skill areas with pro bono support. So if you're wondering, this sounds like an interesting resource, but I want more examples of what can actually be done. What types of skill sets do you have in your pool of skilled volunteers? You can take a look at our pro bono menu and see the different types of projects you can post under each one of these skill categories, from accounting and finance to software engineering to marketing and communications. So take a moment to check out our marketplace. And as you build out your own volunteer efforts and your own volunteer workforce, you can see the field even more by engaging skilled volunteers in doing that. Like I said, most nonprofits, ideally, you're working with all three of those types of volunteers I went over. They're your board members, your hands-on direct service volunteers, and your skilled volunteers who are doing pro bono consulting on your behalf to help build capacity at your organization. So I know we're creeping up on the top of the next hour here, but as promised, I did want to make time for any questions you all might have. And like I said, we'll be following up with you. So if you're like me and you think of brilliant questions at like 1 a.m., the night after, and you want to come back, loop back with us, you'll be able to do that. You can also reach out to our help desk here at help@taprootfoundation.org. But Kristen's going to boost over some questions to me, and I'll try and make sure we answer these online as much as possible. So it looks like one of the first questions we have here is, do you have ideas for appreciation events that are virtual? Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, you can do kind of virtual appreciation events. If you want to dedicate part of regular updates to bringing in superstar volunteers and having them talk about their experience is a great way to recognize really great volunteers. If you another great way to virtually do this is if you're having a board meeting, have your volunteers come and talk to the board directly, because that's a great professional development opportunity for them to be able to present to your board. Get your volunteers out in front of your beneficiaries who you're serving. So whether that's in person or virtual, have volunteers come in and talk to the people that are serving directly, and give the volunteers a chance to kind of platform themselves and their own work. You'll find more often than not that they will kind of take you up on that. But there are other virtual ways. There are like e-cards you can send people. If you have some funds to send people like a small gift card or something like that. If you have a superstar volunteer that you really want to recognize. And you want to bake those kind of celebratory things into your pitch for your volunteer services as well. So every year we pick, 5 volunteers who've really gone above and beyond and, give them a little prize or recognition award or something like that. Question about Taproot Plus is, can organizations in Africa get access to Taproot Plus services? So again, we're not open in any countries in Africa right now. The reason for kind of our geographic restrictions is, believe it or not, there are legal requirements we have to clear before opening an online virtual volunteer marketplace in a foreign jurisdiction. So we're not like global yet, but we are trying to expand as much as possible. And we do actually serve and help organizations that are located in Africa, but usually those organizations are either headquartered in the United States or one of the countries that we're open in, or that project or program in Africa is a fiscally sponsored program of a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you have kind of a signed agreement of fiscal sponsorship from a 501c3 nonprofit, you can use that if you are a program or nonprofit kind of working in any country in Africa. And that applies not just to Africa, but anywhere outside of our geographic restrictions, Africa, Asia, wherever. If you do have fiscal sponsorship from a nonprofit that qualifies, then you could use our services as well under that designation. Someone asked, are we similar to Benevity or Volunteer Match? I'd say yes, we're similar-ish. We're kind of adjacent. We mostly focus on skilled volunteerism, so kind of consultative support. If you're looking, we don't yet do board recruitment on Taproot Plus. However, if you wanted to engage a skilled volunteer, that's an HR board recruitment expert to help you with your board recruitment efforts, you could do that. But we don't host board recruitment listings, and we usually don't host listings for direct hands-on volunteer service in the same way something like Volunteer Match does. So if you do need a workforce to come in and help man the information desk or staff the information desk or stuff envelopes and things like that, we are kind of specific to pro bono consulting specifically. So that's kind of a way in which we are a bit different. How does Taproot vet the pro bono volunteers? So there's kind of 2 prongs to this. On Taproot's end, as a baseline requirement, we want skilled volunteers to have at least 3 years of on-the-job professional experience or training that is commensurate to that before they start volunteering and giving their services back on a pro bono basis. That is what we believe should be the industry standard. So whether someone's volunteering through a Taproot program or anywhere else, that 3 years of experience is the baseline before we want project before anyone gives away their services on a pro bono basis. Pro bono is not really a good place to learn on the job or break in new skill sets. But only you as a nonprofit know who's going to be really the best fit for your organization. So that's where we've built in kind of an interview process into our platform. So the goal of pitching your project on Taproot Plus is to get people's kind of feet in the door, to get them interested, and then you can have a further conversation with them to ask them about their skills and experience, and ask for letters of reference or examples of prior work where applicable. Only you know who's going to be a culture fit for your organization. And do you envision working with this person directly? That's only something the nonprofit can provide. So we have a baseline requirement, but we want the nonprofit, like you said, professionalizing your volunteer service. You want to vet them like you do anyone coming to work at your organization. On average, how quickly do skilled volunteers get matched to volunteer requests? That is something, as you probably can assume, kind of depends, on a lot of different factors, what the type of project is, what skill level you're looking for. What our goal is on Taproot Plus is to try and get projects matched within 2 to 3 weeks of the project going live on our site. So that's our window in which we want to make matches as much as we can. So that's our goal is to get projects matched within 2 weeks, and 2 to 3 weeks, and that's kind of what we're always looking to hit. How were skilled volunteers invited to apply for open positions with nonprofits? So our marketplace is curated. So if a skilled volunteer has created an account, they'll see options of projects that match their skill set kind of filtered to the top of their dashboard specifically. We also send out direct email feelers to advertise projects based off of skill set to skilled volunteers. So if a skilled volunteer is a Taproot Plus volunteer, they will send us, or rather we'll send them based off of their skill profile, new projects that have just come across our desk, and ask them if they'd be interested in working on those projects and encouraging them to apply to those as well. Yeah, someone says, if I could expand on kind of the pro bono consulting aspect, would there be a skilled volunteer who can help us edit video content? So yes, videography and photography assistance is possible. I will say most of our skilled volunteering engagements are happening on a virtual basis. So these are mostly like remote types of opportunities. It's one of the benefits of this type of service is, a consultant in Denver can give help to a nonprofit in Charlotte, North Carolina, for example. There are some things that might require like a skilled volunteer to show up on site. When you do pitch your project, we actually have a box that you can check that allows you to designate that this is an in-person opportunity. Now, what that's going to do, it is going to restrict the geographical field that we boost that project out to. So if you're in a very large metropolitan area, this isn't so much of a problem. If you're at a smaller or maybe more rural mid-sized city, that could really restrict the pool of people who are seeing your project. So just take that into account. In terms of the skill sets we facilitate pro bono consulting in, there's really kind of 4 main buckets. It's marketing, communications, HR and leadership development, business strategy and finance, and information technology. So if you have a need that kind of falls under one of those categories, you could pitch it as a need on Taproot Plus. Someone else is asking, what are the most common, high demand and easiest projects to pitch? Well, especially for the purposes of this presentation discussing volunteerism, I recommend pitching HR and leadership development projects. One of the reasons why I recommend that is because it's not the first ones most nonprofits usually go after, but they can be some of the deepest, most impactful types of projects at your organization, because it is kind of speaking directly to your people power, right? Who your organization is made up of. And so I encourage people to think about HR and leadership development projects, because we tend to have a lot of HR volunteers kind of waiting in the wings. Um, other other um, other kind of inside baseball stats I can give you is, things that tend to be pretty popular are things like marketing-based projects where people need graphic design support. Website design and development projects also tend to be very popular. So those areas are a bit more competitive. You're kind of competing with more nonprofits, for resources in those areas than you would necessarily in others. So just keep that in mind, especially if you're, almost all nonprofits need like some kind of web development help. So it's, if I had my druthers, we'd be able to guarantee 100% a match for everyone. We're not quite there yet, but I can tell you, that's more of a competitive field for pro bono versus like the HR stuff, as you kind of might imagine. This is one of my favorite questions. Someone's asking, so if all of this is pro bono and we're not charging anything, where does Taproot get our revenue from? So Taproot Foundation is mostly funded by partnerships with grant-making foundations, other philanthropic institutions. We partner with a lot of corporations through their corporate social responsibility offices. So we also have an in-house consultancy where we essentially set up pro bono types of services for the employee base of certain companies and other foundations who want to engage their employees on pro bono service. So that's like a whole nother part of Taproot Foundation. That's kind of like our own, like I said, in-house consultancy. And that is primarily the way we are funded, is through those partner organizations, grant-making organizations, foundations, and corporations. I know we're coming right up on time here. And it looks like, I think we've got most of our questions that were dropped down in the chat. So I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here today. I hope you at least took something away that you could use at your organization or make a note of to check up on later, because it's a good idea. If you don't know about Taproot Plus, you can check us out there as well at taprootfoundation.org and create your own account and get your organization set up and registered there. And we'll be happy to see you online, as we like to say. But thank you for taking your time to be here. Everyone have a good rest of your Tuesday.